Hello everyone, and welcome to our last Live at 5 in June, which is of course Pride Month, so I thought that I would end it with the Rainbow Fountain here on the far eastern edge of campus. That is actually not why I was doing the Rainbow Fountain today. This is an audience request, so thank you for sending in a message asking are requesting a certain magical spot on campus to talk about. And so if you've not been on campus in a while or don't know exactly where I am sort of in between the Kingswood dormitories, which are just through this meadow. You can see them popping out. And then the Japanese garden is right on the other side of the old flowing well or rainbow fountain. And so the Japanese garden, which is looking pretty well grown in, is straight through here. But today I want to focus just on ye old rainbow fountain, which, like all of Cranbrook's fountains, is being kept off for the 2020 season. This one, you may have noticed, has actually been kept off for a number of years. There is some piping that is not working in the back of the rainbow fountain, and so we were lucky enough to receive a donation to restore the fountain, which will happen hopefully one day soon, and then 2021 the fountain will be back on. So we'll do just a closer sort of study about the rainbow fountain and how it got here. This area of campus had a number of different springs that popped up. And so there was fresh water down here. And George Booth and his father, Henry Wood Booth, wanted to have these water sources so that they could enjoy the grand old trees and have picnics down here. And so this is where they would have celebrated 4th of July and where they had different picnics and gatherings even before Cranbrook House was built in 1908. In 1916, George Booth got the idea that he would expand this sort of simple ground well into a well-fed or spring-fed fountain. And so he did not design the fountain himself. He turned towards the architect Marcus Burrowes. And Marcus Burrowes started design work in 1915. Construction concluded in 1917. If you don't know Marcus Burrowes, he is sort of second-level Detroit area architect. So once you know the name, he has over 3,000 buildings in the area, but you might not know who he is right off the bat. Marcus Burrowes was born in Erie, New York. He grew up in Ontario and then Denver, where he studied at the Denver School of Art. And then he moved back to Sarnia, Canada, which is the other side of Port Huron, Michigan. And he worked as the Chief Dominion Architect, or in the office of the Chief Dominion Architect in Ottawa for the Canadian Public Works Department, before immigrating back to America and working for Albert Kahn in Detroit. He then worked briefly for the architecture firm of Stratton and Baldwin. And if you are a deep fan of Pewabic pottery, you know the name Stratton, as in Mary Chase Perry Stratton. And her husband was Buck Stratton, who was Michigan's most important arts and crafts architect. He designed Pewabic pottery. He also designed the Women's Club on Campus Martius, or the other park in Detroit. And so Burroughs was part of this arts and crafts firm, and he is who George Booth turned to design many of Cranbrook's outbuildings. So George Booth wanted Albert Kahn to design all of the necessary structures for a country estate, but at the time, Kahn was too busy, and so he recommended this younger architect, Marcus Burrowes. And so Burroughs designed Tower Garage, he designed the chauffeur's housing, he designed greenhouses, he designed farm buildings, he designed the Greek theater, and he designed the flowing well, our rainbow fountain. He also designed the boathouse, and so he was involved at Cranbrook for a number of years. He also designed the homes of Grace Booth and Warren Booth, her brother, two of the Booth children's. And he designed George Booth's brother's house, Ralph Harmon Booth's house in Grosse Pointe, and Marcus Burrowes' own house, which he called Burbrook, after Cranbrook. Burbrook is now in the National Register of Historic Places down in Farmington Hill, so you can check that out from the street. And those of you who are local know the Birmingham Public Safety Department, the police station, and the library are both Marcus Burrowes' building, the Baldwin branch. So Marcus Burrowes designs the fountain, and he designed it to have this originally just a single base, and the lawn went up to it. A little bit later, in the 1920s, George Booth expanded the base of the fountain to come all the way out. Burroughs also designed these urns and this limestone arch, which were carved by Max Greger. And originally, there were actually two additional sculptures. There were ram's heads that were on either side of the central part of the fountain, also carved by Max Greger. And then in the middle, what a lot of people think is that we call it the Rainbow Fountain after the rainbow tiles here, which certainly works, but it was actually the day they turned the fountain on in 1916, the mist came off of the fountain, the light hit it, and it formed dazzling series of prismatic rainbows. And so as the Booth family sat eating their picnic in front of their new fountain, they called it the Rainbow Fountain for all of the rainbows that were caught in the mist. But since the fountain isn't on, we will attribute the title Rainbow Fountain to the tiles. And the tiles are Pewabic pottery. Now, Mary Chase Perry Stratton founded Pewabic in 1903 with her partner Horace Calkins. And they're known as the sort of greatest Michigan arts and crafts pottery, and also the only surviving American arts and crafts pottery. And I thought we'd talk a little bit more about Miss Stratton and her tiles. But before I get too into these tiles, I should warn you, if you're looking at these and thinking, Kevin, those look very bright and shiny. In 2003, Cranbrook received a donation to quote-unquote restore the Rainbow Fountain, which is when the botched piping was put in that no longer works. And also the decision was made to remove the original tiles, and these are all new tiles from 2003. This was before the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research was opened, which is my department and the department that oversees the historic legacy of Cranbrook's buildings and archives. And so I don't know what happened to the original tiles. I don't know exactly how the decisions were made. They were incredibly stained because it was well-fed water, so it was really, really high in iron content. So the fountain looked pretty awful. Do I wish that I hadn't been 13 and in middle school? Maybe. But just as we continue to talk about Pewabic, we are not looking at the original Rainbow Fountain tiles. So with that out of the way, a little bit more about Mary Chase Perry Stratton. She was born in the Upper Peninsula in Hancock, Michigan, and she used to take walks with her father through the coal mines, which were named Pewabic. And the word wabic is a Chippewa term meaning metal. And there's another Chippewa word, bewabic, that's B with a, or bewabic with a B, which means iron or steel. So she moved from the Upper Peninsula after her father's death as a young girl, as a teenager, to Ann Arbor and then to Detroit, where she studied at the art school of the Detroit Museum of Art, the predecessor to the Detroit Institute of Art. Then she studied in Cincinnati, she worked in the South some, and in 1903 she opened the Revelation Kiln in a garage in a carriage house in the city of Detroit. And she partnered with Horace James Calkins, who was a high-heat kiln specialist, and they developed the Revelation Kiln as a sort of portable art pottery. And so Mr. Calkins was the engineering brains and the marketing brains, and Mary Chase Perry was the artistic force behind Pewabic. And together they turned their collaboration into this national enterprise. But Mary Chase Perry Stratton was always very dedicated to individual works of art. When she sold pieces in Chicago in about 1905, she was still selling the wares as either the Revelation Kiln or Miss Perry's Pottery. But she decided to adopt a list of potential words to help the branding of the company. And one of those she pulled from that old copper mine, Pewabic. And so it was actually the Chicago dealer who said, that's your best term, go with that. And so from about 1905 until the present, the company has been known as Pewabic. She never ran it as a factory enterprise. She never had a catalog. It was all individual works of tiles, pottery, and other ceramic wares that were always, if not one-offs, small runs. And so she was very dedicated to keeping the entire enterprise something manageable and something very much rooted in this idea of the individual craftsperson. She did teach at the University of Michigan and at Wayne State, and she received honorary degrees from both institutions as well. But what she is most famous for, and especially later in life, what she perhaps resented being so famous for because she felt she did much more, were her iridescent and luster glazes. And so we're seeing some of the iridescent glazes here. You can see how it catches the sun. And these she was challenged to make in 1903 by Charles Lang Freer. Some of you know the Freer Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C. You may not know that Freer is a Detroit industrialist, debatably a horrible person, but he is famous for bringing the Whistler Room over to Detroit and then giving it to the country. And Freer sent Mary Chase Perry Stratton a set of Babylonian luster shards, and he said, can you make a glaze that mimics these ancient pottery pieces from Mesopotamia? And so Mary Chase Perry Stratton spent the next number of years until 1909 perfecting how she would get these iridescent glazes. She experimented with all different types of chemicals, eventually settling on a low heat firing that involved vaporized kerosene being pumped into the kiln. And it's a reaction between her lead-based glaze frit and the vaporized kerosene, the explosion in the kiln, that creates her shine. Now, she was trying to get an ancient Babylonian shine. The way that the ancient artists did it was simply burying their pottery shards for thousands of years in the sand. And what she was seeing and what Freer were seeing was a chemical reaction between the piece as it had been made and then thousands of years reacting with the earth it was buried in. But she got it much faster. By 1906, she had her iridescent glaze, but she couldn't repeat it. And the thing with the glaze is it's beautiful if you can do it once, but you can't really turn out any type of marketing scheme. You can't make it your signature if you can't repeat it. So she kept incredibly detailed logbooks of all of the different chemicals, the coppers and silvers and leads that she was mixing together. And by 1909, she had gotten her heat right, the lead glaze base right, and then all of the oxides that she put into the glaze to create her iridescent and her luster wares. Iridescent Pewabic pottery has metallic flecks that are in the glaze and they are reflecting through the depth of the glaze. A lusterware finish is a solid metallic surface that is reflecting light off of the glaze with no light going inside of it. We no longer use lead glazes at Pewabic, or they no longer use lead glazes, I don't think. Correct me if you're watching. And they don't use vaporized kerosene. So the ones that we're seeing here are done through a different chemical process. But she did make her name and become famous and exhibited so widely because of her iridescent pieces. So you can see her work in Detroit at the DIA, those amazing cases that she did at the Detroit Public Library. You can see her at the Immaculate Conception Church in Washington, D.C., the shrine. Here at Cranbrook, you can see her at Kingswood and Thornley and Christchurch Cranbrook. This is the only one you can see without having a key and a guide. And her work is really all over the country. And the pottery, miraculously, after her own death in 1961, the daybooks continued from 1903 in a straight series until 1969, when the pottery was given to Michigan State University. In 1981, the pottery was given, or left the university and became its own nonprofit, and they are still going strong. So it's amazing that in their 1907 Buck Stratton designed building down on Jefferson Avenue in Detroit, they are still doing the same work that Mary Chase Perry Stratton started, which is making pottery, exhibiting pottery, not only Pewabic, but all American and Canadian artists, selling, teaching classes, and educating people about ceramics. It's kind of amazing that it's still going on virtually unchanged from her first efforts. And just as it was originally, Pewabic manages to create these pieces by a balance of both chemistry and firing. It is this sort of art and science that is so interesting about clay and ceramic bodies. And they still don't have, they're not a sort of industrial production, but if you want a Pewabic backsplash in a fireplace, they still do one-off architectural commissions. Now, I did bring a little book just to promote how you can learn more about Pewabic. This was written by my predecessor, Stephanie Duglutz-Acton, who was the first collections fellow for the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. It was written on the occasion of the donation from Gerald McNeely of his collection of Pewabic pottery. And so it talks about all of these beautiful vessels that are now part of Cranbrook Art Museum. But most interesting for us today is the Pewabic pottery in the Cranbrook collections and George Booth and Mary Chase Perry Stratton, Contemporaries and Crafts. And this is the essay that Stephanie wrote about the history of George Booth and Pewabic. And in the essay, we have Mary Chase Perry, later Mary Chase Perry Stratton, at work on the Rainbow Fountain. So this is the only photo of Mary working on an architectural commission. All of the other photos she's working on a vessel or working in her studio are photographed with the tiles. This is the only photo showing her at work. And it was taken right here at the corner of the Rainbow Fountain in 1916. I love her Edwardian dress and her great Edwardian hat. And you can see that she is laying out the tiles that would eventually be installed in the Rainbow Fountain. There's another pretty great essay in the book by Thomas Brunk, who we just recently passed away, and he wrote about the history of glazes and the way that Mary Chase Perry Stratton developed her glazes. So you can purchase this book through the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research website, and we'll ship it as soon as we're reopened. It was designed by Elliot Earls, the head of the 2D design department at Cranbrook Academy of Art. So I will leave us with just another close-up view of the tiles, because I neglected to point out some of the design. So Mary Chase Perry Stratton was very inspired by sort of late Roman and Byzantine tiling. She, like so many arts and crafts artists, the Renaissance was the downfall of all good taste, and so she's not interested in any type of classical revival. So even though it is overall symmetrical, you'll notice that she uses a wide variety of asymmetrical primitive forms, so wheels and diamonds, shapes that you could find thousands of years old. She has adapted into her tiles. There are, interestingly, a couple of pictorial tapestry tiles. So here's a man hauling in a fish. You can buy this at the Pewabic gift shop. And then on this side, here's a lady resting under her tree. And then probably my favorite part about the tile installation, and you'll see that she is using a mixture of solid glazes and then the iridescent glazes. By 1918, she was less interested in her iridescent glazes and she was more interested in solid colors, which is why you see things like the Kingswood installations being all just shades of non-iridescent greens. My favorite part, though, are these pieces up here, which are these funny little tiles that serve as the voussoirs between the arches. And so you see these little pieces that are just allowing these square tiles to form an arch. There you have a thistle. At the very top, you have a little pig's head above where the water comes out. And if any of you were involved in the 2003 restoration and replacement and you want to correct me, do send me a note, because I'd love to know more about that process. It was unfortunately not especially well documented in the archives what exactly was the change, how they made these unique pieces again. I do know that for the shapes, those were all correct because Pewabic has its complete archive of shapes. And so these were made from the original molds, and that's how they keep making them for sale in the gift shop, is they simply reproduce the original plaster molds into silicone molds, and they can keep making them forever and ever. What happened to the old ram's heads? In 1924, George Booth had them removed from the fieldstone wall and moved to Brookside School, to the Ram's house, which was where his hydraulic ram system was, which was pumping water onto the campus. And so the ram's heads are still at Brookside. Of course, if you're walking down Cranbrook Road and you're on the other side of this edifice, you know that there's a lovely little stone bench, also designed by Marcus Burrowes, and a lovely little granite water fountain, again to the designs of Burroughs. I hope you enjoyed this closer look at the rainbow fountain. I see a comment that Booth family members made those funny little characters. That would make sense to me. They're not characteristic of the work of Mary Chase Perry Stratton whatsoever. I hope you enjoyed this tour. I will not be here on Thursday. I have the day off for the 4th of July holiday. And next week, look for an announcement about how there may be some changes coming to Live at 5. We're going down to one Live at 5 a week on Instagram and one on Facebook. But lest you think you are not going to get your fix of either me or of Cranbrook, whichever you like better, we are transitioning to some paid programs. So we're coming up with a list of new lectures and tours to give you the insider view of Cranbrook, but also allow us to become sustainable in this time of no tours and of COVID. So I hope that you've enjoyed this Live at 5 and all of the previous Live at 5. Many of them are in our Instagram feed. All of the Facebook ones are posted to Facebook. I'll be back next Tuesday with another Live at 5. Send me a message if you have a request of where you want to go, and be safe. Thanks for following the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research on our Instagram. Make sure you go like us on Facebook and sign up for our email if you don't subscribe already. And if you want to know about any type of future programming, lectures, special events, talks, make sure that you're subscribed to our email list. We only send out emails Wednesdays. That's the only one that you'll get from the Center for Collections. And you can register for that, the same place that you can buy the Pewabic book, and the same place that you can make a donation for the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And that's at our website, center.cranbrook.edu. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next Tuesday. And I hope everyone has a wonderful 4th of July holiday, and I'll see you soon.